Helen Carter. The charity case. The badge was lying right on my plate. The seal was gold. The font was Madeline's calligraphy. I didn't flinch. I just pinned it to my dress. Something cracked inside my chest. The next morning they learned what real charity was. My name is Helen Carter. I am 68 years old. I am a widow. I live in a modest apartment, drink coffee from an old cup, and until recently put up with the contempt of my son's new family. Madeline is his fiancée, the daughter of banking tycoons with the manners of an empress. Her world is crystal, gloss, and packaging. Mine is patience. But even patience has a price. If you've ever felt like a stranger at your own table, write about it in the comments. If you've ever been underestimated because of your appearance or wealth, subscribe. Believe me, you'll be interested to find out how it all ended. The doorbell rang before I had time to take off my apron. The clock read 5:48 p.m. Madeline had arrived 12 minutes early, as those who want to catch someone off guard tend to do. "Mrs. Carter?" "Just Helen. Come in." Her pointed-toe shoes crossed the threshold as if afraid of getting dirty. She slowly scanned the living room, the sofa with its worn armrest, the photo of Daniel at graduation, the vase of artificial daisies. Everything lingered in her gaze a fraction of a second longer than it should have. "Cozy," she said. "Almost rustic chic." I straightened my shoulders, even though my back ached after a whole day on my feet. "Tea. If you have bergamot," she said and sat down on the edge of the chair. Like a visitor to a museum of provincial life, I placed a regular cup with a thin crack at the rim in front of her. She took a sip, and the corner of her mouth twitched. "Do you like it?" I asked. "It has an interesting flavor," she replied. "Very homey." We talked about nothing. The weather, the upcoming wedding, flowers for the bouquet. The words were soft, but a cold wind blew between them. Not a single detail escaped her. Not the dust under the windowsill, nor the coffee stain on the tablecloth. And then she smiled, like someone smiles before firing a gun. I realized as soon as I entered the driveway, people don't come here, they arrive here. Automatic gates, a black and gold coat of arms on wrought iron posts, an alleyway half a lifetime long. The Ashfords lived as if their house were a museum and they themselves were exhibits, carefully selected by time. The hall greeted me with the scent of peonies and polish. A huge mirror reflected me in two guises at once, a guest and an outsider. "Mrs. Carter," Victoria exclaimed as she approached. "We're so glad you could make it." So glad sounded like so curious. Her ring sparkled next to my simple watch, as if the comparison were made without words. "Please make yourself at home," she added, pointing her champagne glass somewhere toward the colonnade. The conversations were like porcelain, loud, fragile, and empty. We put another 600 into the yacht, just to make sure the deck was replaced with the right teak. And I told Johnson, no new villa in Palm Beach, no line in the will. I stood next to their jokes like a backdrop. "And you, Helen, how are you doing?" They finally turned to me. "I buy coffee in bulk when it's on sale. It's fun." The pause lasted forever. Someone laughed politely. Someone laughed sincerely. And then I noticed that the waiter, a guy in his 20s, was looking at me with understanding. My fingers were numb from the bouquets. I was sorting through roses in my backyard when I dialed the number. Victoria's voice always sounded like you were calling the reception desk on a Manhattan floor. I thought maybe I could help with something, decorating the hall, seating the guests. "That's sweet of you, Helen," she interrupted. "But we've already assigned everything. We have our own team, our own understanding of quality." Her voice was smooth, but there was a hint of fatigue from having to be polite. It was as if I had offered an extra pair of hands, and they were waiting for me to suggest leaving. "Of course," I replied, wrapping the stems in a damp cloth. "Then if anything, I'll be nearby." A week later I tried again. "I can take care of dinner before rehearsal. I did that when Daniel graduated from college." Pause. The sound of a glass being set down on the counter. "Oh, Helen, how touching. But we can't let you overexert yourself. It's going to be quite expensive, you understand." The word expensive left a metallic taste in my mouth. Not from the money, from the tone. I ended the conversation sooner than I wanted to. Only me and the crumbs from the bun I hadn't finished eating remained in the kitchen. The words were not spoken, but they felt like a slap in the face. Daniel's call caught me with the broom in my hands, as always untimely and too short. Mom, you won't believe it, we chose a place for the ceremony. By the lake, where the willows are, remember? That sounds beautiful. What about transportation for the guests? Will you arrange shuttles? The silence on the other end lasted a little longer than usual. Well, Madeline has already confirmed the logistics. Her guys are taking care of it. The guys. As if they were talking about shooting a music video, not a wedding. He continued hurriedly. By the way, about the music, Madeline thought you might want to write your requests in a shared file if you want. File? Well, a list for everyone, in case there are suggestions for the repertoire. The words sounded like a door being held open only out of politeness. I wiped my hands, which still smelled of laundry soap. Just tell me, Dan, if you want me to participate. Really? Of course. It's just, Madeline is in charge of everything right now. It's easier for her that way. I listened as my son's voice rose a notch, as if he were defending himself not from me, but from her. I hung up and realized I had been cut out without being asked. The chandelier above us cost more than my car. The crystals sparkled so brightly that I kept squinting, as if the place itself was against the presence of outsiders. You're holding up amazingly well, whispered the woman in diamonds on my left. Just like a Faulkner heroine. I didn't have time to ask what she meant. She was already discussing marble staircases in Tuscany with her neighbor. My name was not mentioned. Not because they had forgotten it. It just didn't matter here. I was like the table setting. Clean, neutral, invisible. Victoria threw a couple of pleasantries my way. Things like, "Oh, what weather?" But she didn't even glance in my direction. Towards the end of dinner, I tried anyway. What a wonderful selection of dishes. Who did the catering? Oh, it's a private chef. We've been using him since Caroline got married in Paris, replied the woman in the moss-colored dress, without turning to me. At some point, I noticed that my fork wasn't clinking. I stopped eating. I just sat there, feeling like an installation on the theme of awkwardness. Then someone nearby made a joke, something about lovers and doormen. Everyone laughed. And so did I. I laughed not because it was funny, but so I wouldn't cry. I arrived exactly 8 minutes late. Enough time for everyone to notice that I wasn't expected. The club's banquet hall was like a box of jewels. Glitter, rustling, and the scent of expensive perfume. Gifts for the bride were lined up in a row like proof of wealth. Every name was a brand. Every gift was an investment in status. I handed my box to the blue-clad salesman at the entrance. To Madeline Ashford, I specified. Inside was a simple crystal vase from Macy's. Heavy, honest, with a clear neck as if made for truth. How sweet, Madeline said, untying the ribbon. A vase. From Helen Carter. She emphasized my last name with the same intonation a restaurateur uses when mentioning a customer's allergies. The room grew too quiet. Practical, she added. Not everyone has silverware. Someone behind us snorted. Laughter rippled through the room, not loudly but in unison, like an audience that knows when to play along with an actor. I clenched my fingers around the chair. The sharp seams of the bag dug into my palm. Every bride needs something, she continued. Something simple. As a reminder. I nodded. There were more words than necessary. And silence too. And yet I left the wrapping paper behind for notes. The number slipped out accidentally. 200,000. And that was just for the decor and rent. Victoria said it easily, between a sip of Prosecco and a comment about the brand of chairs. I sat in the corner of the room, listening to the organizers discuss air arches, helicopter filming, and a piano that would be delivered directly to the garden, if it doesn't ruin the symmetry. My shoulders ached. I was unaccustomed to being so quiet. Sometimes I just wanted to shout, "Are you really getting married? Or are you putting on an exhibition?" But Madeline walked around the space as if it were a catwalk, choosing not flowers but a throne. "The dress has already been sent from Milan," she announced with a smile that I had only seen in shop windows. "It should be monumental. Monumental. Not delicate. Not warm. Not hers." In between discussions, I looked at the sketches. One of them was a copy of Princess Diana's silhouette, only with a deeper neckline. Madeline wanted to be a bride who was looked up to, and the dress seemed to have been chosen with that in mind. "Did you have a white dress?" she asked unexpectedly. "Yes," I said. "A simple one. I sewed it myself." "Charming," she smiled. "Such economy. That dress cost as much as 3 years of my previous life." Table 9 was closer to the kitchen door than to the archway of roses under which the Ashfords were seated. I smelled burnt oil before I saw the menu. Nearby were Madeline's 2 distant cousins, a lone school friend, and an elderly couple who still hadn't figured out who the groom was. No one argued over seats, there was nothing to hold on to here. When the bride appeared in the dining room, her dress seemed to glow. The voices fell silent. Toasts were made, words of gratitude were spoken. Quotes from poets she had probably never read were recited. "I hope you're comfortable, Helen," she said as she approached. "Of course. The atmosphere is very welcoming. We just decided not to mix the tables. Family, loved ones, friends, everything has to be organized." Her voice was the same as before, but her eyes seemed to be without a veil. A subtle mockery and icy politeness, like morning frost on a porcelain cup. "And besides," she added, adjusting her ring, "you don't mind, do you? You're used to being on the sidelines. And you don't mind dividing people into categories?" She paused for a second, smiled. "Only when they demand it." I realized she was waiting for me to break down. The card lay on the edge of the plate, neat as a museum invitation. Heavy paper, embossed with gold, smooth calligraphy. Helen Carter. And underneath it, in slightly lighter cursive, the charity case. The word charity stuck somewhere between my diaphragm and my throat. I picked up the badge with 2 fingers, as if it were something fragile but dirty. No one said anything, and there was no need to. "Oh my God," whispered the woman opposite, pressing her hand to her chest. "It must be a mistake." "Oh, I'm sure it's a joke," Victoria interjected. Madeline loves irony so much. The laughter began with one voice, sharp, confident. "Charles." Others followed, restrained, drawn out, like applause in a theater where the audience isn't sure when to applaud. I pinned the badge to my dress, just like they taught us in the registration department back when I was really on the brink of survival. My fingers trembled not from pain, but from the precision of my aim. No one called me that out loud, even in the years when I cleaned houses for pocket money. I stood up, carefully pushed my chair back and nodded to Madeline. "Thank you for your honesty." But I didn't tear up that batch. Kept it. The library smelled of leather bindings and patience. Rays of light fell in stripes on the carpet, as if someone had forgotten to close the blinds in their head. I sat by the far window, opposite the shelf labeled History of the Ashford Family, where even the dust settled more neatly than in the rest of the house. There was a note in front of me. "Call him after 2 p.m. Don't say too much. Remind him about dinner on Friday and the gift for Dad. And don't mention the wedding. He'll bring it up himself." No signature was needed. The handwriting was round and forceful. "Madeline." The phone felt cold in my hand. It seemed to have more right to speak than I did. The mother of his bride. I dialed the number. 1 ring. 2. "Yes." Lawrence, as if in an elevator. "Hi, it's Helen. I just wanted to remind you about the gift and Friday dinner." Of course, Madeline already told me. But thank you. The word already lingered longer than it should have. "Well." There was a pause. He waited for me to check the script, but I remained silent. Someone laughed softly behind the door downstairs. I glanced at the shelf with the volume of the Newport Dynasty. A bookmark stuck out carelessly, as if someone had stopped reading at the very place where the lie began. I pressed call, and the rickety building began to creak. The balcony creaked when I leaned on the railing, as if it too wanted distance from me. The morning wind blew in my face, not caring who was standing before it, a widow or a new relative, a mistake or a threat. I pressed the coffee cup to my chest to warm myself, but the ceramic remained cold. Sounds came from below, from the garden. They were dismantling the rose arch, gathering tablecloths, and carrying away glasses. The wedding slipped away from the lawn like an illusion blurred by the night rain. White heel marks on the grass were the last signs of yesterday's spectacle. There were footsteps somewhere behind the door. I didn't turn around. "How are you?" Lawrence wasn't asking, he was checking. Better than they expected. My voice sounded calmer than I felt inside. He didn't answer. His shoulder was close. Silence was a rare language we still knew how to speak. If Harold were alive, he wouldn't have allowed this ball of hypocrisy. He knew how to stop people with a glance, not with rudeness but with principle. He would have silently stood between me and their gestures, between my name and their jokes. I straightened up. The wind blew in my face, but now it was like a reminder. I am alive. My dress fluttered behind me like a flag. Not white. Not surrendered. He taught me to wait, not to take revenge. This is not revenge. First, I looked for documents and found cracks. The folders in Lawrence's office were arranged by color, but inside was chaos of versions, dates, amounts. Small inconsistencies like dust on a polished surface. Invisible until you look closely. It's just a recalculation of assets, Lawrence said without looking up. But his voice faltered, like a bad card player's cards breaking in his hands. I didn't argue. I sat down in the chair opposite him and watched him sweat over the numbers. Sheet after sheet, signature after signature. The company Victoria was so proud of was like an antique display case. The facade was museum-worthy, but inside it was empty. These accounts. I pointed to the printout. Why are there 6 of them if there are only 3 assets? He froze. Then he exhaled. We have a long tradition. It's complicated. Complicated is when there are $3 in the account, but the wedding costs $100,000. When you stretch credit like a ribbon, hoping no one will notice how worn it is. They weren't doing business. They were playing beautifully for the public on credit. And everything was held together not by success, but by the fact that no one asked unnecessary questions. I didn't destroy it, I just removed the supports. The phone rang so insistently, as if the house was on fire. I stared at the screen without answering. Daniel. For the 6th time. I knew exactly what he would say, but I didn't know how his voice would sound when the familiar foundation beneath him began to crack. Mom. You couldn't. You didn't. He stammered like a schoolboy at the blackboard. It was the first time I had heard such a confused mom. I expected accusations but heard silence. Madeline seemed to be nearby. Even the silence in her house had a commanding tone. Why did you interfere? He asked. Why didn't you talk to me? I could have justified myself. Said that I wanted to protect. That I was trying to save what could still be saved. But something inside me remained silent. And that silence was more honest than any of Victoria's speeches. I could hear her whispering in the background, muffled, as if the voice was coming from inside a safe. We're in control of everything. She won't prove anything. Then I said, I'm sorry, Daniel. Sometimes to see clearly you have to turn off the lights. He didn't answer. He just tuned out. And in that silence, for the first time in a long time, I felt no fear. And all I did was make a phone call. One phone call. I immediately noticed that she was uncomfortable. Madeline sat at the table as if she were at a meeting with the tax inspector. Her coffee was getting cold, the foam had shrunk. She didn't take a sip. Thank you for coming, she said without looking up. She didn't make time, she didn't pay attention. She just came, as if I were already on the other side. The cafe was strangely cozy. Speckled tiles, homemade flowers, the smell of caramel. Too honest a space for her. The soft lamp revealed the wrinkles under her eyes, the cracks in her lipstick, her thin hands, her trembling fingers. Everything you think is wrong. I was silent. There was no point in drinking. For the first time ever, she wasn't leading, but searching for common ground. Victoria would have gone on the offensive, but Madeline just sat there. You understand that it's hard for Daniel, don't you? He's not the one asking right now. She flinched. Please, we can discuss everything. Never before had the word please sounded so tense. I leaned back in my chair and crossed my arms. Numbers floated into my head, not amounts, no. Scenes. Words. Looks. Laughter that scratched. She was still standing straight. But when I didn't answer, she lowered her shoulders slightly. Finally, she looked up at me. Her lips trembled, not with pity, with helplessness. Madeline grabbed the piece of paper as if it might burn her. Her scarlet manicured fingers clung to the edges as if to an enemy flag. The paper rustled. The sound was almost indecent in the overly quiet meeting room. Are you kidding? This is... I waited for her to continue. She didn't need to. The list was neat. No epithets, no threats. Just actions. Just consequences. No lawyers, no press, no guardianship. This is blackmail, she whispered. It's a structure. The word cut through the air. Her eyes darted from point to point. Impossible. Very possible. Everything you did was outside the realm of normality. Now everything is inside. I saw despair pulsing inside her, changing her face. Anger was her last line of defense. Who's helping you? Who gave you this legal junk? I remained silent. She didn't deserve to be named. I won't allow it, she shouted. It's too late, I replied. My voice was steady, almost like someone else's. I didn't want revenge. Only equality. Only boundaries. The piece of paper didn't contain demands. It contained a mirror. He knocked 3 times, briefly, as if the door still belonged to him. I didn't open it right away. Let him wait. Let him breathe someone else's air. Edward stood there without his coat. His collar was wet. His umbrella carelessly left by the elevator. Can we talk? He asked without calling me by name. I nodded and moved deeper into the kitchen. He entered as one enters a church one hasn't been to in a long time. We sat across from each other, a bowl of tea between us. He didn't touch it. I didn't come to defend myself. I came to listen. His voice was not trembling but dry. Tired. Why now? I asked. He spread his arms as if he had lost his excuses. Because everything burned down. I could see that he was looking at me not as his daughter, but as someone capable of bearing his shame. I knew a lot, Helen, but not everything. I smiled. That's convenient. Yes, he agreed. It's convenient. And cowardly. For the first time, he wasn't hiding behind his surname. Only his shoulders slightly hunched and his fingers trembling on his knees. I can't change the past, but I want to be there if... I stood up. I didn't chase him away. I just kept quiet. Now he knew my name. My real name. They entered together, like people who had lost their bearings but were still clinging to appearances. Madeline walked slowly, as if she were learning to walk again. Daniel followed her. His footsteps sounded hollow, like someone who wasn't sure if he wanted to hear what I had to say. I didn't offer them a seat. What do you want, Madeline? She didn't answer right away. She looked out the window, at the very bench where we used to sit after the library. I didn't come to bargain, she said quietly. I came to admit something. For the first time, without a phrase from a reputation management textbook. Without emphasis on her surname. Just a voice that beat hollowly. Too late? You won't believe me, she added, without waiting for my answer. I already do, I said, picking up the cup and burning myself, not with tea but with the moment. Daniel was silent, his hands clenched into fists. Mom, are you serious? His voice was both childish and adult at the same time. Yes, she nodded. I was wrong. The pause between was and wrong could have lasted a year. Madeline's shoulders slumped. It was as if her makeup had been removed. I didn't smile. I just cleared the empty cup from the table. Now she knew the price of the words I was wrong. Numbers don't lie, especially when they're backed by years. I laid the papers out on the table like you play poker, slowly, precisely. Each line was a piece of their life lived on autopilot, under the cover of a surname. Each check was the answer to a question they hadn't even asked. What's this? Daniel looked up. Legacy, she said briefly. Madeline didn't move. She just blinked. Once, I could see her thoughts racing, as fast as my pulse had once been on the school stairs. You? From the very beginning? I nodded. Why? Edward's voice was steady, like someone who had finally stopped playing a role. Because you were all looking for power and I was looking for security. Do you see the difference? Daniel stood up, walked around the table and saw the numbers, as if they were someone else's file. You did all this alone? Yes. He didn't ask the next question. He already knew the answer. Then who were you to us? Madeline asked, for the first time without her defensive walls. I gripped the arm of the chair. I was always there. You just didn't look. The sound of a wet rag on the tile reminded me of something very old. Something forgotten. Madeline leaned on the mop like a cane. Her back straight, her hair pulled back, her nails short. The uniform fit her unnaturally, like someone else's skin, but she didn't take it off even during lunch break. "Can I draw another one?" The curly-haired girl held out her sketchbook. "Of course." Madeline sat down next to her, and the smile she gave the child had no hidden meaning. The room smelled of soap and markers. Dust no longer hid under the carpets. It was shaken out, from the corners, from the soul. When no one was looking, Madeline stroked the old cabinet door as if apologizing. "Are you kind?" asked the boy, propping his head up with his fist. She didn't answer right away. She just straightened up and reached for the bucket, as if it were a question about the pain in her shoulders. Her hands were cracked, her fingers calloused, but she no longer hid them. "I try," she said quietly, and the silence accepted this answer without irony. She wiped the sweat from her forehead and looked him in the eyes for the first time. The tablecloth was smoothly starched, but her fingers still trembled. I stood in the doorway as if before a stage. Seated at the table were those who had once looked down on me. Now they waited for me to take my place. Madeline rose first. Without arrogance. Without pretense. "We're glad you came." Her voice didn't waver. Before, her every word had struck like a whip. Today it simply touched me. The aroma tickled my nostrils. Lemon, rosemary, a hint of curry. She knew I didn't eat beef and took it into account. No one was playing a role or showing social politeness. Even Daniel didn't look away. "Can you sit next to me?" Madeline asked. She didn't order. She didn't insist. She asked. My chair was comfortable, as if it had been waiting just for me. The conversation flowed naturally, without pauses but also without haste. They laughed, unafraid of being vulnerable. Madeline hugged me goodbye. Gently, unconditionally. I stood in the hallway, holding on to that moment like the edge of a blanket. And on the napkin next to me lay a new name tag. Simply Helen.